Right then, time to get the best out of these players. Hello everybody, welcome back to PES 101. Today we're going to be tackling the subject of training, both the first team and the youth team. We're combining it into one episode because honestly, it works exactly the same whether you're talking about your first 11 or your youth players. So first of all, we need to show you where to access training, and that is under team management. And you can see here there are two tabs that you can select: training and youth team training. The one that we're going to focus on mostly today is training, but believe me, youth team training is exactly the same. I'll show you very briefly at the end. It is exactly the same layout. It's just that it's a screen for your youth team players rather than your main players. So let's click on training and you'll see it will bring up an information screen here where it will try to explain in a very small amount of words what I'm going to take probably about 15 minutes to tell you. This is where you can designate the abilities that you want your players to focus on during their daily training sessions, check the types of training available and the players' particular attributes, and tailor the training regime to the player's individual needs. That way you can get the right player for the right role. Well, they're not wrong. But I do want to go into slightly more detail because there are things about training which I didn't understand when I first started using this feature, which I do understand a little bit better now, and I wish I'd known about them sooner. So I'm going to let you guys know about them as well. The first thing to know, of course, is how training can develop your players. That's the most important thing after all. You want to try and get the best out of your players that you can. Now, there are certain players where training is going to be kind of a sticking plaster over a massive gaping wound. Bannon is a player in that ilk. You can see that at the moment his training is probably going to arrest his decline for the next year or so. He's rated at 74. It looks as though he'll be rated 74 until around about his 32nd birthday, maybe halfway between 32 and 33 years old. But he is on the decline, unfortunately. So his training, you could try to tailor more to keep his key attributes high. If we click X, it will bring us into the menu where we can select what training we want him to be doing. And you can see that he's got Creative Playmaker selected at the moment. And on the right hand side, you see all of these green arrows that indicate where he's spending time developing his skills. So he's spending a lot of time on his offensive awareness, which, to be honest, is so low that I don't think it's worth focusing on. He's also spending an awful lot of time on his passing, which is actually something that's very worthwhile because he's got very good passing. However, his tight possession, which is one of his strengths, he's not really doing much to develop that. His dribbling and his ball control aren't getting as much uh, attention as they probably could do, and things like balance and stamina as well are not that great. He's not a quick player. He's only got 68 speed and 72 acceleration, and frankly, at his age with that kind of acceleration, I don't think he's the sort of player that we should be concentrating too much on his speed to begin with. But we can look at other training regimes that can probably help to arrest his decline and benefit him a bit more. So let's just go through a few of these and see what suits him. Now, he's not going to be a winger, so we can get a prolific winger and roaming flank. We can discount those immediately. Cross specialist as well. It's a wide player. It's someone that has a decent amount of pace. That's really not what he is. Now, classic number 10 is an interesting one because although it doesn't put as much stock into low passing as Creative Playmaker does, it puts a lot more emphasis on ball control. And if you were to hit the left-hand side of the trackpad on your PlayStation remote, you can actually bring up a little help menu here. And if you scroll down, it will show you every single role and a description of what that role is. Now, a classic number 10 is a static playmaker who uses deft touches and passes rather than pace or movement. Well, that sounds like our boy, doesn't it? Because he's not very quick. And if he's not very quick, then being a static playmaker would be perfect for him because then he can concentrate on his strengths, which is passing, control of the ball, an ability to open up spaces for others. But is it the best for him? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to keep going. So if we keep going down, there's nothing really else that suits him. It's either going to be creative playmaker or it's going to be classic number 10. So the question is, which one do we go for? Do you know, I feel like classic number 10 would benefit him more because it's going to maintain his ball control longer. His offensive awareness is already shot. His speed and acceleration are non-existent anyway. I think a classic number 10 might suit him. But the thing to remember as well, and this is something that I wanted to get into, and this is the thing that I wish I'd known sooner, is that training settings don't just affect what's trained, they actually affect the way that the player behaves on the pitch, especially when you're not controlling them, when they're being controlled by the AI, when they're off the ball. And it can be the difference between a team that plays exactly as you want them and a team that doesn't play how you want them at all. A creative playmaker, if we bring up the help box again and go down to creative playmaker, a player who takes advantage of any opening in the defence to initiate attacks and assists in shots on goal. He does move around. From my experience, a creative playmaker does move around a little bit more than a classic number 10 does. And so the big question is, do you want to have that static linchpin in the middle of the park that sprays balls left, right, and centre? Or do you want a player who is slightly more mobile? Bearing in mind that his speed is not brilliant, so he's not going to get there quickly, but he will get there. His offensive awareness, his offensive intelligence, if you will, is not high at all. It's not going to get higher. Even with 4 stars, I don't think it's going to improve greatly at his age. So it really comes down to a judgment call. With older players, I find that you just want to try and give as much training to as many of their standout attributes as possible. And in this instance, between creative playmaker and classic number 10, it's kind of a 50-50 as to which one to go for. I feel like maybe we might actually do it. We might actually be better off if we do stick with creative playmaker. Um, but it depends if we have any free kick takers in the team because it looks like he's a fairly decent free kick taker at the moment. And classic number 10 would give him a little bit of training focus on place kicking. We'll leave him as a creative playmaker for now and hope to find a better example as we continue. So, as we go down the list, and we do have them sorted for overall rating, so the best players are at the top. We have a 26-year-old midfielder, Patterson, who is a box-to-box midfielder, which is a brilliant role. It really is a brilliant role. They are all action. They're at the top. They're at the base. They attack. They defend. They do everything. They're water carriers. They're finishers. They're tacklers. It's a little bit of everything. It's a very, very cool role to have in the middle of the park. And looking at his stats, he's good physically, he's good in the air, he's quick, he's got good offensive awareness. His passing isn't the best, but it's not awful. But he's got 88 stamina, and that is something which cannot be underestimated. A box to box player does need great stamina. So the box to box instruction is something where you're going to see that player all over the pitch. And they're going to really help to carry the load, especially if you've got a slightly less mobile player alongside them. Someone like Bannon, actually. Bannon and Patterson might make a pretty decent partnership in the middle of the park. Where it becomes interesting, and I'm just going to try and find a. Here we go. Wingers. Now, this is something that is a little bit more interesting to me. Wingers come in 3 flavours. You could argue they could be creative playmakers as well, but really there are 3 flavours to wingers. There's prolific wingers, roaming flank, and cross specialists. Now, a cross specialist is your traditional winger. It's a guy that sticks out wide, likes to use his pace to get past people, and crosses the ball into the box. And you can see that from the stats that are being trained here. So he's got lofted passing, low passing, speed, acceleration, curling of the ball, He's got stamina being worked on, weak foot accuracy in case he has to come inside on his weak foot, and conditioning as well. Ball control is a key part of it, as is dribbling. Cross specialist really is the guy that just gets the ball down the wing, crosses it in. It's kind of like a slightly more mobile David Beckham, if you will. Roaming flank is probably my favourite version of the winger because this is your inside forward. This is the guy that plays on the wing, but really he's a frustrated striker. He's a guy that wants to come in off of the wing and he wants to score goals. Now, you could train all of your wingers to play like this, but you have to ask yourself the question, does the player suit the role? And in the case of this player, I would argue very much no. Because if you look at his finishing, it's 63. You look at his offensive awareness, it's only 66. I don't think he's built for this. And you can see what they need by where the training is focused. And it's focused mainly on things like ball control, offensive awareness, low passing, place kicking, curling, acceleration. Finishing is a focus, but it's not as much of a focus, and I think it probably should be more of a focus, to be honest. And then you get onto prolific winger. And this is the interesting thing to me, because the prolific winger, in actuality, plays more like an inverted winger. They're a creative player that cuts inside, but more often than not looks to create chances than to make them. This is from my experience of playing the game. Maybe other people have experienced it differently. But to me, the prolific winger, even though the training is set up to be more like a inside forward, it's actually more of an inverted winger, which is kind of weird, but there we go. So when you're choosing these training settings, there are two things that you have to think about primarily. You have to think about how you want your player to actually play, because training settings will affect something which I'll show you now, which is playing style. If you look on the right hand side here, A green, nationality, league, team, playing style. His playing style is roaming flank, and it's no coincidence that his playing style and his training regime are the same thing. If I was to switch him over to a prolific winger, which wouldn't suit him, so let's not make him a prolific winger, let's make him a cross specialist. You see he's still listed, if I can find him again, because I've just bollocks that up. You can see he's still listed as a roaming flank playing style, but after a while, the training will take effect. It will change his playing style to cross specialist, and you will notice the player playing differently. Now, I don't think that there's any greater example of this and the effect that it can have than in my Nottingham Forest save that I'm doing on this channel at the moment, where Arcas was changed from, I think he was a classic number 10, and I changed him into a whole player. If we go into, let's find a player that would benefit from that kind of thing. Right, I mean Brown is already a whole player, so let's go into here, and then we can bring this up and go down to whole player, and you'll see that a whole player is a player who looks to make runs into the opposition goal area when the team is on the attack. This is the Frank Lampard role, for those of you that want an example, a real life example. It's an attacking midfielder who doesn't really defend. He's only ever looking to attack and will make runs into the box to try and get on the end of chances. He's kind of the box to box midfielder, except that he doesn't like defending. Um, it's a very different type of role from the classic number 10, where, as we've said before, is a very static playmaker. They sit behind the front man and they look to play balls in behind the defence, get the striker and the supporting players onto the ball and into attacking areas. The whole player is someone that will try to play passes, but will also try to get into areas where they can have the ball passed to them to score goals, and it completely changes the way that your team plays. If you play a 4-2-3-1, which is a very popular formation at the moment, and the attacking midfielder is a classic number 10, then expect your front three, your two wing forwards and your centre forward, to get a lot of chances. But if you want your whole player to get involved a bit more and to score goals, a classic number 10 isn't going to do it. You're going to need a whole player. And I think that that kind of formation really benefits from using a whole player. So you can see there that the benefits of a playing style shouldn't be underestimated, because even if I went into Brown's profile here and I looked at classic number 10, and let's argue, for the sake of argument, that his stats made him a really good candidate to be a classic number 10. If the way that I play doesn't suit having a classic number 10 in the team, there's no point in doing that. You're much better off trying to mold your players into the type of players that will benefit your system than to blindly give them training that will only benefit them and their stats. You don't want a round peg for a square hole, or a square peg for a round hole. You want to try and match the player to the position. And this is a trap that I think some people do fall into with their training, and they wonder why their players don't play as well as other players do. And it all comes down to playing style. It's such an important aspect of training. It's something that you definitely need to pay attention to. Now, there is another aspect to training before we leave you today that I really want to focus in on, and it's not on the training page. So we're going to cancel out of here. And one thing I will say before we finish up with this is, do make sure to go through and make sure that everybody does have a training regime, and that that training regime matches the way that you want to play football. And it's no more important than if you were to go into youth team training, because you'll find a lot of youth team players are set to balanced. And look, there's nothing wrong with a balanced training regime. Everything is going to increase, everything is going to get better, but it'll get better slower. If you've got a player like, and let's look at Harrington for this example, right? He's got good ball control, he's got good tight possession, he's speedy, he's got good acceleration, he's got a good weaker foot. Looking at his other stats, he's a decent ball winner. So to me, that says kind of box to box, except his stamina isn't that great. So we could train him as a box to box player now and hope that 3 arrows in the stamina is going to be enough to get his stamina up quickly. Or we could look at putting him in another role which might benefit him slightly more. And what I'm looking at, again, to no one's surprise, is whole player, because it focuses on speed and acceleration, which he has. It focuses on ball control, which he's got in spades. Offensive awareness, which he's pretty decent at. His passing is okay and will improve with 2 arrows each. He's not a great finisher, but honestly, as long as you can lever the ball pretty hard, it doesn't really matter that much. Um, I've had players with finishing of 66 who have pulled off amazing finishes, so don't worry too much about that. Tight possession doesn't get any love, which is an issue, but given that he's rated 75 in that already, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. So whole player is something that be I would be considering, to be honest with you. Um, you could also go for an orchestrator, or you could go for a destroyer, since he has good ball winning. You could actually turn him into a pretty decent defensive midfielder if you wanted to, a very fast defensive midfielder. But the issue for him, if you're going to play him as a midfielder, especially a defensive one, is he's got jumping of 56, heading of 67, and if we look at his height, which is here somewhere, 183 centimeters, puts him around about the 6 foot mark. He's big, but with that jumping reach, he's not going to win many headers. So you have to think about how he's going to suit your team, and where your weaknesses are going to lie. So make sure that you go through training, and anyone that's set to balanced, just have a look and see if balanced is going to suit them. And if it's not, then have a look at what would benefit them more. I mean, Post is a goalkeeper. There's no point training him on everything. Put him on a defensive or an offensive goalkeeper duty, and watch his stats absolutely race through the roof. It's really up to you. With these youth team players, they will develop as quickly or as slowly as you allow them to, but you do need to show them some level of interest, even if they're rated like Post is at 58. Like Post is rated at 58 now, but you have to remember that goalkeeper stats are judged on a much lower number of criteria. Like they're judged on jumping, physical contact, balance. They're judged on goalkeeper awareness, catching, clearing, reflexes, and reach. Having changed him from balanced to defensive goalkeeper is going to accelerate his development no end. And while it might not be enough to turn him into a top-notch keeper, by the time that he's 19, at the moment, we're looking at him being rated at around about 64. Now, one thing I've never tried is actually putting him on balanced and then looking at his development again. And look at how that blue line has changed. You see how his blue line has changed there? When he's 19, on a balanced regimen, he's going to be rated 61. But if we put him back on offensive or defensive goalkeeper, it doesn't really matter. Let's try offensive this time. Why not? Look at that. Look at that. The blue line's gone through the roof. And that's because we've showed him love in the right areas. We've given him training, which is going to allow him to develop into a better goalkeeper. So don't be afraid to go in here and, like Harrington, look at Harrington. He's going to flatline by the time he's 21, apparently. So let's go into balanced, and let's, just for the sake of argument, let's make him into a whole player. Let's look at his development now. Well, it's above the average. It's above where he was. His grey line, he's above that. So there's a great example there, a visual example of how changing from balanced to specific training regimes can really help a player to excel. But just make sure, for goodness sake, honestly, make sure that the training that you're giving the player benefits the player, suits the player, and suits your tactical approach. Now, the one last thing that I really wanted to get into, and this is related to training, and it's something that I ignored for a very long time, and I wish I hadn't. If we go into skill training, now skill training is something that if we were to, let's cancel out of here for a second because I need to show you something in the players gallery here. Right, player skills on the right hand side here. You can see Bannon has got cut behind and turn, Scotch move, heel trick, all that good stuff. Captaincy, that's a really good one to have, captaincy. Skills are attributes that players have that allow them to pull certain things off easier and unlock tricks and flicks for other players. But what's actually really important is that you recognize that skills are something that can be taught. And skill training is the place where you need to go to do that. It costs you nothing. But if you have players who are eligible to learn certain skills, you should absolutely take advantage of it. For example, captaincy has a really, really good effect on your team. If you have a player who has the captaincy effect in your starting lineup, they will inspire the team, reducing the effects of fatigue on all players. So stamina will reduce less quickly. There are plenty of skills here that we can teach our players. We can teach tracking back, which if you've got midfielders that, like a central midfielder like Luongo, who maybe goes forward a little bit more than you would want them to if you're playing them as a defensive midfielder, the track back skill is really handy to have. Another one which is really handy to have is gamesmanship, because you'll win more free kicks and dare I say more penalties. But absolutely no harm in looking through these skills, and if you have players that are eligible to learn certain skills, for goodness sake, teach it to them, because it's not going to cost you anything and it's going to develop the player. I can give you an example from my Nottingham Forest save, which is Arcas. Again, I keep talking about Arcas, but he's a brilliant little player. Arcas is a attacking midfielder cross support striker. He's the linchpin of my attack, and often the ball will be played into him, and then he'll try to play the ball through either to his strike partner or to one of the wide midfielders to try and get a shot in on goal. Now, I recognised that he had very good passing ability, and something that he didn't have was the one-touch pass skill. So I trained him on it, and he got it. And then I came back into skill training, and I realised that because he had one-touch passing, he could now do no-look passing. So now Arcas is able to roll the ball behind him with the back heel and feed his strike partner in without even looking, and he's able to do it with a first touch. And he is so much more deadly as an attacking midfielder, as a provider now, because of those skills. And I love these skills where it says there on the right, controls, and it says you don't need any special command. Absolutely guarantee you, if you can train a player on any skill that doesn't need a special command, like pinpoint crossing, for example, you should absolutely do it, because it's free skills, it's free ability, it's free improvement of your players, and if nothing else, it makes your player worth a little bit more. So definitely take advantage of training, whether it be regular training or skill training. Remember to go through your youth team and make sure that all of your youth team players are on specific training regimes. Don't use general unless you absolutely have to, and try to get the best out of your players. Well, that's going to do it for another episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any hints or tips about training that you'd like to share with the class, put them in the comments down below. But until next time, when we're going to be talking about transfers, thank you very much for watching. Take care. I'll see you soon.